With whatever line they introduce in 2015, I hope that they come up with something that is more inspired, it is more interesting. I doubt it will be as good as Bionicle, but at least it might be something fresh and new, you know? And when 2015 comes around, and you guys have seen whatever toys they're releasing then, you'll probably think that what I'm saying now is just a load of hype. Some are hoping that they bring back Bionicle, but I honestly don't think they will. I would like it if they did, but I have to wonder just how they would go about it, how they would carry on with it. But even if it is something completely different, I at least look forward to seeing something fresh and new and just more interesting than what they've done lately.
Simply put, Bionicle is my childhood. As a child, I loved it more than Transformers, more than Spider-Man, heck, more than Star Wars. I know some people who aren't that familiar with this toy line turned epic may scoff at that, and, well, that's fine. I'm not trying to say it actually is better than something like Star Wars. I'm just saying that Bionicle was a bigger thing in my life. It was there for me in the way those other things were there for other kids, and it's influenced me a lot over the years, even long after its original run ended. Now it's back and it looks just as special as ever, so what better way to celebrate than to go on a return trip of our own to a time before time. Bionicle's seen its share of games. Most of them range from pretty cool to mediocre. I'm not going to go through all these in order, but we may as well begin with a look at the game that started all. Nope, not that one. As much as I love that game, no. Tales of the Tahunga for the Game Boy is where it really started. Not that many people have played this one, in most cases because they just didn't know about it at the time of its release. I was in that boat too and eventually found it years later used at a GameStop. I always enjoy exploring obscure little games like these, peering into the rarely seen recesses of what was. I've gotta say, this is a pretty good introduction to the world of Bionicle. You explore every region, visit every village, meet the village elders, talk to a few other people on the way, and you're constantly running into the local wildlife, all of which can be built using the parts included in a single set that would be released a little while later. You play as a McDonald's ex-employee who was banished from his village for the heinous crime of being kinda lazy, now on a quest for redemption in the eyes of his snooty old boss. You can give him whatever colors you want when starting a new game, and even name him, though there is an official name for this character who will be, like, really important as the story goes on. The graphics are alright, kinda muddy, but colorful and detailed enough considering how old it is. The music is okay. I don't remember all of the tracks, and most of them are really short, but a few of them can be surprisingly atmospheric, like in Powahee, the desert region. The gameplay's pretty good in all honesty, nothing outstanding, but it's functional and satisfying. At the start of the game, all you have to throw at enemies is fruit that you find laying around. I guess a smell knocks them out after a while. Soon enough, you get better equipment, throwing discs that deal a lot more damage, this zippity doodah that lets you fling yourself across chasms and whatnot, and even a lava surfboard. Yeah. There's 6 levels, though I guess you could say each one is divided into 2 acts. One where you have to rescue the village elder, known as a Turaga, and then a quest to retrieve something of great importance to them before moving on to the next region. There's also a bunch of mostly optional mini-games. There's a lot of platforming in some of these levels, and in all honesty, it's pretty awkward. The collision detection is really wonky, and the isometric view doesn't exactly help. I got the hang of it pretty quickly though, and didn't have much trouble after jumping around the second level a bit. It's really finicky, and not everyone's gonna get the hang of it. Some will though. Anyway, it's not a great game, but I can't call it bad in good faith. Some may find it more frustrating or tedious than others, but my experience with it was pretty good, so I just wanted to share it. Jokes aside, the story's pretty okay too. This is one of the few times where they really tried to actually tell a story. Yeah, most of these games are pretty light on the dialogue and don't really tie into the overarching narrative, the bigger picture of things. They're usually either a super simplified, super condensed take on that year's story arc, or there's no dialogue whatsoever. Simply put, most of these games are just made to sell toys. Well, so is this one, but at least there's a little more to it than that. I mean, this is supposed to be our first introduction to this world, so it better be good. The last level is pretty brutal. There's lava everywhere, and it ends with a sequence that always makes my stomach pucker. There's so much randomly generated stuff. It's gonna be a different experience every time, but sometimes the amount of obstacles clumped together in one spot makes it impossible to avoid. Once you make it out with the last of the artifacts you need to summon the Toa, the real heroes of the story, you get a free trip across the island, and you just barely miss one of the heroes. So there you have it. That's where the legend began. The next game, Torrent Adventures, isn't really tied to the previous game in any way. There's no dialogue or anything, just see them? Good, okay, no, here's you, and here's you again. Oh, okay, good, go! You don't get to play as the guy from the previous game, because he's working at Burger King now, but you get to play as his former coworkers. You start as Kangu, the green one. You can unlock 5 of the Matoran, 1 in every level aside from the final one, though you'd have to start a new game to play as any of them. In each level, you're also accompanied by one of the Turaga, who can destroy obstacles with their voodoo. It's a special attack that you can only use 3 times without collecting extra glowy things. It's not really an attack per se, but it does cause serious damage to enemies who wander too close when you're doing it. You can switch between the 2 characters on the fly to progress through the levels. The level design is okay. There's a lot of platforming, and they find more than a few ways to mix it up from level to level. It's simple, but competently put together. It gets pretty hard around the middle of the game, though the last couple of stages are surprisingly easy. I'd really say it's ever unfair. Like last time, you fight Rahi, that's what they call the animals, but you also have Borak, the new primary antagonist, to deal with. They're not that much tougher, just enough to be a step up from the usual enemies without being frustrating. You attack with a throwing disc that you can increase its reach, and eventually get a second disc. This becomes a very different game when your Matoran is maxed out, though you'll lose that when you die. The music is pretty nice. Great in fact for a Game Boy game. It's a lot more dramatic and emotive than in Tales of the Tahunga, though I feel some of the best music is in the earlier levels. Pretty good game. In fact, I'd say on a technical level, it's better than Tales of the Tahunga. That said, I still find the admittedly more awkward first game more enjoyable because of its content. I just get sucked into it. Next, Bionicle-the game, released in 2003. In this one, you finally get to play as the real heroes. About time too. The Game Boy version is okay, but that's really it. You jump around, you hit stuff. Its biggest failing is that it's another isometric game, and I find it a lot more finicky than the first one. The characters are very sluggish, and as dumb as it sounds, I can't help wondering if it might have something to do with the way their models move. I don't know. Personally, I just don't find it quite as interesting as the first game. Its take on this world doesn't feel as real or fleshed out to me, and while I could adjust to the awkward collision detection in the first game, this one's just a little too much for me. I wouldn't recommend it. The console version is better, but far from great. This game mixes elements from 2001, 2, and 3 together, trying to throw a little of everything in there. Unfortunately, half of the game's content was cut. 4 stages of the Toa Mata, and at least 1, maybe 2, heck, maybe 3 in their later forms of Toa Nuva. What is there is pretty underwhelming. The controls are fine, but you feel really heavy and slow. There's no melee combat to speak of, even though you mostly use melee weapons like swords and axes. You don't even use a Toa's unique elemental powers. You don't get to spew fire or make tidal waves or any nice things like that. You just fling generic energy balls that home in on enemies and block their blast with a force field. Blasting them uses up energy, which you refill by blocking their energy blast or taking a moment to recharge yourself. Aside from that, there's no strategy to this. You just blast away and recharge and blast some more, and you can seriously just stand in one spot, surrounded by enemies, and none of them will touch you as long as you keep tapping the shield button. The environments are okay, though I would have liked to see some of the areas that were cut. Heck, some of them actually look cooler than the final game. I feel this game was a huge missed opportunity to see what you could really do as a Toa. Make bridges out of ice or stone across bottomless pits, burn obstacles out of your way. As it is, these characters are so interchangeable, I could just as easily imagine this game being about anything not related to Bionicle. There's some decent platforming, but it's really bare bones. They try to mix it up with swimming, gliding, and whatnot, but it only does so much. The music is pretty dull, the voice acting is passable, but that's just being nice. The graphics are spotty, the combat is repetitive, and the whole thing just feels unremarkable all around. I liked this game when it was first released, but I just find it really dull now. It's an okay game, but for something called Bionicle-the game, it should have been so much more. And just like that, you're the new CEO of the company. After that, there were a couple of more handheld games. Maze of Shadows is alright, but kinda bland. It's a self-contained story about the company's former CEOs. Okay, I'll stop. Finding a cure for one of their own who's been poisoned. Ultimately, it's just another Bionicle game. Then there's Bionicle Heroes. You blast stuff, run around, and blast more stuff. Jeez, I'm sorry I'm just glossing over these later handheld games, but they just kinda die after a while. There weren't any more after this one, though. Like all the rest, it's okay. The only game we've looked at so far that I can honestly say is kinda bad is this one. The console version's clunky and dumb, but it still works. Anyway, the console version of Bionicle Heroes, an over-the-shoulder third-person shooter where you play as some of the characters from Matoran Adventures now turned Toa, is one of the better Bionicle games. It's incredibly easy and simplistic, but fun and polished and perfectly playable. In this one, you start a level with just a couple of characters, but around the level you can find masks that unlock other characters and then switch between them on the fly. You play as 6 total, though you can also play as each of the Paraka you take down at the end of each world, and a 7th unlockable character once you be in the game. While I criticize Bionicle the game for lacking melee combat where I feel it would work really well, this game doesn't really need it. The weapons and abilities you do have in this game offer a lot more variety and depth than in that game, where everyone played almost exactly the same, and they also have powers to boot. In this game, each hero works a bit differently. Jala can walk on hot surfaces and has the most balanced weapon. Halle can walk on water and has a continuously firing ray gun. Kongo can jump over huge distances to reach green pads, and carries a scatter gun. Mataro can zoom in on enemies with a sniper rifle. Huki can build things to progress to the next area, or just earn some extra dough, and boasts a rocket launcher. Nupara can climb up walls and ceilings with runes on them, and packs a powerful grenade launcher. The differences might sound small, but they do help. The characters even have different running speeds, as inconsequential as that might seem, and we've barely even scratched the surface of all the other things they can do. By collecting enough studs and going to the shop in the hub world, you can unlock a second set of abilities using the character's elemental powers to find more loot. I recommend getting the 50% discount immediately. Halle can fill tanks of water to unlock gates. Kongo can spin fence with his wind power to open other gates. Huki can destroy clumps of rocks. Nupara can pull things right out of the ground. Jala can destroy overgrowths of foliage. And Mataro can create bridges and platforms out of ice. This is what I was asking for a few minutes ago. It's exactly the kind of thing I wanted to see in Bionicle the game, putting the Toa's actual power to use. There are also areas that only the Paraka can access, and there's even such a thing as black bricks that only the final unlockable character can move. Needless to say, you're going to be making a lot, and I mean a lot of return trips to get all of the hidden goodies there are throughout the game. These collectibles might not be for everybody, but for die-hard Bionicle fans, they're a must-have. They unlock content in a gallery where you read up on all sorts of stuff from Bionicle's lore. Character bios, set information, Kanohi mask powers. This is a treasure trove of nostalgia. For a game with so little bearing on the actual story, this aspect of it is surprisingly faithful to Bionicle's lore. I really appreciate this tribute to it. Needless to say, all of these abilities and accessible areas and collectibles make for an insane amount of content, and there's no way you'll be able to get everything on your first run through most of these stages due to the sheer amount of extra stuff. So now you're going to want to get lots of loot using your abilities to access areas where you can get more loot to unlock more abilities and get even more loot and secrets. That's a lot of replay value for a game about shooting every living creature you see. My one criticism about the character abilities is Huki being used to construct things. There are times when the whole area is littered with things for him to work his mojo on, but he's the slowest character, so running, or rather walking all over the place just to get a few extra studs can be kind of a hassle. You can kind of work around this by constantly switching between him and a faster character like Kongo or Jala, but this is still tedious. I wish they came up with something else for him to do, and just let everybody else have this power. Since it's such an important ability used dozens of times to progress, and hundreds of other times just to get more loot, it seems really odd to restrict something almost everything in the game is built around to one character, and giving the other characters his ability would speed things up a lot. And as nice as this game is overall, there's another key gimmick that really brings it down for me. Like in most LEGO games nowadays, you collect studs, which in this case are actually Technic bits, but they're essentially the same thing gameplay-wise. You can get them by scouring the environment, but you mostly get them from defeated enemies who just spill them all over the place. Once you've collected enough to fill up the bar at the top of the screen, you trigger hero mode. Your character becomes indestructible, you get this great invincibility theme, and now all of the toy can use special golden pieces to build things. Now this must sound pretty awesome, right? Well, not really. It doesn't ruin the game, but it limits the possible outcomes of most scenarios and causes the game to fall into repetition. When you trigger hero mode, it doesn't go away after a little while. You stay in hero mode until you find a pile of gold bricks to use. So depending on how quickly you collect those studs, and how early you trigger hero mode, you could spend huge portions of the level completely impervious to attacks, making it extremely easy. And if by some chance you make it to the gold bricks but haven't triggered hero mode yet, there should be enough destructible stuff laying around for you to get it in like 30 seconds. Honestly, I kinda wish the gold pieces and hero mode weren't even there. It just slows the game down even more and affects so many things, especially the boss battles. Some of them I feel can't even really be called that. Most bosses will just stand in one spot for most of the fight, and have a shield that goes down after an arbitrary amount of time, allowing you to get a hidden before the shield goes back up. And normal enemies start jumping in so you can collect their studs, trigger hero mode, and hit the boss with some crazy golden contraption that destroys half of their health bar. You do this again and again and again, and it's only satisfying so many times. Sure, not every boss fight goes exactly this way. Sometimes you do these things in a different order, and some bosses even walk around with you. Wow! But that really doesn't do much to make these battles feel less repetitive. Even putting that aside though, it's just crazy how easy it is to collect enough studs to trigger hero mode in no time flat. Here's how my playthroughs usually go. I'm the kind of guy who kind of has a problem and can't help snatching every single collectible piece I see, so I play almost the entire game in hero mode as a result. To put this into perspective, it takes little more than a few thousand stars to trigger hero mode. Each level has about 100,000 to collect on average. So yeah, I usually end up going through most of the level in hero mode, leisurely walking circles around enemies who can't affect me, and once I've used hero mode, I trigger it again 2 minutes later just from collecting more stuff. A lot of times I found myself completely ignoring enemies to look for more loot while in hero mode. They aren't going anywhere. The theme that plays while you're in hero mode is a good one, but when it starts to feel like most of the game's soundtrack consists of this one tune, you get pretty sick of it. I honestly wish hero mode wasn't there. It just makes parts of the game a lot more boring than they should be. It's not like there aren't other incentives to collect studs. Along with the second set of abilities I mentioned earlier that you unlock in the shop, you can also upgrade each character's weapon, not just increasing their attack power, but also changing their area of effect, rate of fire, and things like that. You can also upgrade each character's health bar. Each time one character is destroyed, your health bar resets. You can think of it as each character being an extra life, but I prefer to think of it as one super long health bar that they all share, and enemies frequently drop hearts to replenish your health, and you only really die if you lose all 6 characters, and if you lose a character you can bring them back by fighting their mask again. Even without hero mode, all of this makes the game pretty darn easy, so much that there's not really a need for it at all. Anyway, it's still a good game. There are just some things about it that I feel are really unnecessary. There's still a lot of positives to go over. The soundtrack is the best you'll hear in any retail Bionicle game by far. It's not amazing, but it's really good. There's a lot of variety, and the boss themes in particular are really something. While the graphics aren't that great for its time, the scenery is lovely. While the textures are kind of muddy, the lighting and colors really makes these places quite pretty. Even when they're trying to look dreary, it still looks nice. There's some crazy architecture, and it's blended nicely with the natural beauty of the wild. Most levels feature at least one giant monument built in the villain's honor, and they really add to the place. I admit that a big part of what makes me like this game is this world they've brought to life. It's not the same place we're used to seeing in most of the other games, but it's got a good atmosphere of its own. It's mysterious and worn, like things should be a little nicer here for the residents, but something's gone horribly wrong. Aside from, being invaded by the bad guys. The scenery is quite beautiful, whether you're trudging through the wilderness or pushing deeper into enemy strongholds. This is one of those cases where the art direction easily makes up for any graphical shortcomings or hiccups. If you get the Xbox 360 version, there's some extra lighting and blur effects that add even more to the atmosphere of this place. Another thing I like about this game is the fan service. You don't really fight any Rahi, but they brought back loads of other enemies from Bionicle's history. We've got Borak, Vaki, Vizorak, Rocksheep, Titans. This game has it all. Most of these other characters don't even belong because their presence doesn't make any sense story-wise, but I really don't care. The game is so light on plot it doesn't have any bearing on the actual Bionicle canon, so it's like acting out a childhood fantasy where all your favorite characters appeared just because. And you were there, and you were there, and you were there. It's just fun to see these guys again and kill them. Voyanui itself, the island this takes place on, is huge. There's about 20 levels that take you all over the map, not including the fights with the Paraka, the big bats of that year, and some of them are really, really big. I don't mind though. That just means I get to see more of this fantastic place. Overall, Bionicle Heroes is easily the best retail Bionicle game you're going to find out there. It has a cool world, tons of content, upgradable characters, a good soundtrack. If nothing else, I can safely say it's the most competently put together of all the games we've looked at. While it does have a couple of big flaws, I can't say much else to criticize the game. It's more fun than Bionicle the game, I can tell you that much. Unfortunately, this is where gaming kind of ended for Bionicle. At the end of the day, they hinted at a sequel for the next year's story, but alas, such a game was never made. There were plenty of online games, but most of them weren't really anything to talk about. This fighting game released in 2009 is kinda neat, but this is about as big as they ever got. I guess we're done here. Well, not really. We still have one more special game to look at. The Maanui online game released back in 2001 is not only my favorite Bionicle game, but one of my favorite games of all time. Like, seriously, top 10 material. Maybe top 5. I know that's a tall order, but this game deserves it. It's not really all that amazing, but it's one of the most pure, flawless games I've ever seen. It doesn't do anything wrong. I can't make any points against it. It just gives and gives. If you don't want to listen to me spurge about this game for another 3 or 4 hours, I'll try to break it down in about as many minutes. This simple point-and-click adventure is everything none of those retail games we've looked at ever even came close to being. Picking up seconds after the ending of Tales of the Tahunga, you continue exploring the island of Ma'anui, meet the Toa, and learn everything there was for us to know about this world and its people at the time. Everything you need to know about the premise is perfectly explained by the first few people you meet, and even conveyed with a bit of visual storytelling. And yet there's so much more to learn and see and experience, and it's like nothing else you've ever seen. It really is the little things that make this world feel so alive. There's not any way to lose, no fail states except maybe near the end. You just explore at your leisure, learning more about the islanders' way of life on the way. Another part of the game's charm that gives it this really timeless sort of feel is the animation. The early bits are a little rough since this game was originally released in packs, but the animation and style quickly improve and the game in general is just beautiful. Aside from a few pixely sky backgrounds, the game still looks good to this day. I can still look at these places and marvel at their timeless beauty because the art styles made it age better than, well, most video games I've ever seen, to be perfectly honest. You can just feel the passion that went into this, how strongly the people who worked on this believed in what they were making, like they didn't have a shred of doubt in their minds that kids would love and immortalize this, and they gave Bionicle the real beginning it deserved. And it's in no small part thanks to this game and what it showed us about the Toa's world that Bionicle was so successful back in the day. I mean, I have no doubt Bionicle would have been successful even without this game. I bought all 6 of the Toa and Turaga, and a few Rahi before ever even playing it. But as cool as the sets were, having Bionicle lovingly brought to life this way made it feel real to us on a level that just made Bionicle's explosion even bigger. There's a few puzzles, some problem solving, and a bit of item collecting, but those are as video game-like as this ever gets. These elements are made extremely light so as not to get in the way of what the game is actually about. Most of your interaction with this game is through your many exchanges with the Matoran themselves. Now and then you'll be there to witness one of the Toa's epic battles, but you yourself don't really jump in to fight anything for most of the game. It's just not about that. Given the game's huge focus on dialogue, then, it's a good thing the writing is actually good. The dialogue's well written and fun to read because it gives us a lot of unexpected insight into how the Matoran go about their days and how much they've lost over the years, just trying to scrape on by for a little longer as they wait for the Toa to save them while their culture steadily declines. These people used to be an incredibly advanced civilization, with spaceships and ivory towers and everything, but since leaving their original home and coming to this island, their entire culture has basically died. Almost nobody remembers the old ways or where they came from or who they really are, and they've regressed to an almost tribal state, separating into small isolated clans scattered around the island, fending for themselves as evil forces continue to wear them down and erode away at what little remains of their once great race. None of this is ever really outright stated in the game. For all you know, this is how they've always been and they're relatively content with where they've ended up. But there's all sorts of hints that something ain't quite right with this world. Maybe not enough for us to pick up at the time, but enough to give the island this intense atmosphere that grabbed us and wouldn't let go. The whole juxtaposition of these biomechanical beings you'd expect to see on a place like Cybertron or something, appearing on a tropical island of all places with shrines and idols and primitive villages, was so surreal. It had never been done at the time, so it was really interesting to us. There are pieces of rundown technology here and there. Most of the Matoran probably don't understand how this stuff works anymore, and it feels almost as out of place as they do, if not more so. There are cryptic messages etched on certain landmarks. Who wrote them or how long ago they were written is unknown. The most obvious suspects will be the Turaga themselves, but even after everything we learn in later years, you can never be sure. These remnants of a culture that seems far more advanced than the Matoran let on give the island this really eerie feel that's pretty tricky to capture. There's just something off about this place, and even if you never completely understand it, it's really cool to let yourself get sucked into it. As colorful and lighthearted as the game is on the surface, it's kind of unsettling, and for a kid's game that's great. And yet as you travel from village to village, meeting people and helping them in small ways, making friends, and witnessing the Toa's deeds to pass on to others, you inspire the clans to reunite as one people. And by the end of the game, everyone's fighting to save the island, with you right at the center of it all. That's just too cool when you're a kid, and for what it is, it's a good story. The atmosphere feels even stronger in certain corners of the island. This cliff where you can look through an astrologer's telescope and visit one of the Matoran's shrines sounds like a nice enough place, but the whole time you're here there's this really creepy music playing. Music is so important in a game, and when I'm here and this starts playing, I feel like I'm being watched by somebody. And given how mysterious this island is, they could be anywhere and I never know who it was. They spent so much time building up this Makuta guy, sometimes making him sound like a boogeyman and other times making him sound like the Matoran's equivalent of the devil. You get such a strong sense of what's terrorizing these people even though you never see Makuta until one of the game's final cutscenes, yet by the time I met him I already felt like I kinda knew the guy. There are certain moments we experienced in our earlier days of gaming that leave such an impression on us that to this day we remember them as vividly as if they just happened. like falling through the sky as Yoshi. For me, stepping down the telescope's pedestal and looking at this dreary, haunted island with its myths and boogeymen and all that stuff was one of those defining moments. I know subtle is a word that gets thrown around a lot at games that don't really deserve to be called that, but that's what this game is in spades. As eerie as it is, it's a kind of thing you might not be able to articulate immediately. There's a niche to this game, but it isn't nearly as overt or over the top as later attempts to make Bionicle edgier for its aging demographic, with characters spouting how delightful it is to brutally mutilate people in various ways. Yeah. See, what makes this game so grown up is that it isn't trying to be. It doesn't try to shock you with how dark and super serial it can be, so because it's so unpretentious, so unashamed with what it is, it feels so far ahead of its time, even looking at it now. You don't need to be a kid to enjoy this, and that's what makes a kid's game great. In the end, this is a toy commercial, but they weren't just selling you toys. They were selling you an adventure unlike any other, and we wanted to be there for every wonderful moment of it and live it out with these characters. There hasn't been a single game to give me the same feeling this one does, to have such a strongly realized and fleshed out world. All I can say at this point is that as simple as it is, it's brilliant, and I don't think it'll ever feel dated, even long after all these other games do. There was also a second Matanui online game. It's okay, but I don't care for it much. It focuses less on the atmosphere that made the first game so distinct and focuses more on typical video game busywork, like item collecting and resource management and farming. I guess they thought adding these elements would make the game more engaging by making it feel more like, well, a game. But when you're not watching Holly chop down her 50th bamboo stalk, or backtracking to get more air bladders so you can dive deeper underwater, or upgrading your stamina so you can dive deeper underwater, or performing menial tasks to boost your strength, speed, and whatnot so you can perform better in Koli matches, or scrolling through your massive inventory to find some random trinket that you need to unlock a door, or doing any number of other mundane time-consuming tasks, there's not much else to see. Another thing that brings this game down is how your character moves. The animations are nice, but she runs pretty slowly, and you're going to spend so much time watching her do this. This shouldn't be a big deal, but for me it is. In the first game, you can just click on a place and zip over there in like a second. Here though, there's so much waiting. When backtracking somewhere to do one thing so you can do another thing so you can do another thing isn't tedious, it just gets frustrating. The first game works because none of that stuff gets in the way. Your inventory is small, and the backtracking is minimal, and the gameplay may be light, but it's for the best. It's an escapist fantasy where exploring the island and taking it all in is all there is to do. Here, there's so much to do that you could never decide what to do first. It's just boring. It's not a bad game, but I wouldn't say it's anything special. Even now though, as Bionicle begins anew for another generation, with this bold new world completely unlike the one we knew as children, we can still go back to the island of Matanui. Spexal and a few other guys on BZ Power are making something special for those of us who just can't let the old world of Bionicle go. Taking place during an untold chapter of Bionicle in the days when the Matoran are preparing to leave the island forever and return to their original homeland, the Matanui Online Game 3, Destinies, appropriately named MNOG 3D for short, returns us to a first-person perspective like in the first game, only now you can move around and stuff in a 3D environment and it looks great. You can actually swim. There's even some item collecting like in the second game, and you'd think these sorts of things would bug me, but I'm pretty confident they'll downplay this part of the game enough for it to be painless. My problem with these elements in the second game was that they completely dominated the experience and just slowed everything down needlessly. Here though, there's that emphasis on just walking around talking to people, which was in the second game too, but the dialogue here feels so much closer to how people talked in that game. They also poke fun at things none of them, or us, would know about for several years, things that would have sounded crazy to us back in those days, and appropriately still do. They even take a couple of jabs at the new Bionicle. Overall, I think they blended the best elements of both games to make something great. So far, only Gakara is available, but just based on the impression I got from this place, I can't wait to see more. Honestly, it's kinda hard for me to recommend most of these games. I enjoy some of them. Bionicle Hero should be easy enough to come by, but I definitely recommend and urge everyone who's still watching this video to try out the Matanui Online game, and the Matanui Online Game 3. You can play the first one at Templar Studios' own website, and great spirits be willing, it'll always be there. The new game can be downloaded right from its thread on BC Power. Anyone who's just getting into Bionicle and wants to see what they missed, or any kids who are excited for the reboot and its new line of figures, and who might be just a little curious about what came before, please, go give it a try, and see what define a generation of Bionicle fans. If you ask me, the future of Bionicle looks pretty bright at the moment. The sets look great, the new world looks fresh, but even on our side of things, I'm seeing old fans come together and be more productive than they've been in years. For a time, the Bionicle community seemed like it was dying, but now it's more alive than ever. Heck, I'm one of these people. I admit I kind of fell out of Bionicle for a couple of years because I was just so disillusioned, but now so many people are coming back. I realize that LEGO can't solely depend on us to keep the new line going, that the bulk of their income needs to come from the new kids, but if it's anything like it was back in the day, if it has that spark that made us so special, I have no doubt kids will love it. And when they see all there is to look back on, maybe they'll come to understand just what it means to guys like me, and always will, right into my twilight years. Well, I guess that's it. This has been a pretty good year for me in terms of videos. Early on I didn't think there'd be much to talk about, but I had a lot of fun making these recent videos. I can't say much about next year. You'll see the usual video game review every couple of months. I'll probably do an LP of my number 9 similar to my Freedom Planet run. In the next few weeks though, you can definitely look forward to seeing new Bionicle videos. I'll make one video reviewing the Protectors, one reviewing the Toa, and one about the Lord of Skull Spiders, and my general thoughts on the new line as of this point. I've also just finished the first story arc of my own Bionicle fanfiction, Nova Orbis. I'll start the second story arc a little ways into next year. Just recently, I saw someone write that they loved this story so much, it's the definitive continuation of Bionicle in their eyes. Other people have implied this, but they were one of the first to outright state it, and it was a pretty big eye-opener for me. Guys, you have no idea how much this means to me. Ever since I was a child, every now and then, I've tried to make my own new spin on Bionicle. Usually a remake of the events of the Matanui Online game, or something seen from the Toa's perspective or something like that. I must have tried dozens of times over the years, but in every single case, I cancelled these works before long because I realized how futile my efforts to somehow improve Bionicle were. Bionicle was already pretty much perfect in my eyes. There was nothing I could do to make it better or more magical. But I could add to it. Early this year, before there was any inkling that Bionicle was returning for real, I started this series that, while set in the distant future, still takes place in the old canon's world. Sort of. So for people for whom this new reboot just isn't enough, they can always come to my world, my story, and to see that after all my failed attempts since childhood, I've somehow managed to make something that's worthy in people's eyes of being a successor to the original Bionicle, that I've made something that they think is good enough to be called that. It's probably the most fulfilling thing that could possibly happen to me as a Bionicle fan. Thank you. Anyway, thanks for sticking with me through another year, guys. It's been cool. Toodles!